Hey monsters! Thanks for tuning in to Murder Murder News, the true crime cult for the latest breaking news, murdery memes, TV reviews, podcast recommendations, and all things spooky, plus baby goats. I'm Aurora.
And I'm Angelina. This is the week in true crime.
Murder News.
3 teenage girls were arrested in New York this week for allegedly attacking a 51-year-old Asian woman at a bus stop in the Bronx. The 3 girls are being charged with hate crimes, and police are looking for a 4th girl involved in the attack. The girls reportedly hit the woman over the head with an umbrella and demanded to know why she wasn't wearing a face mask. There have been at least 1,000 attacks on Asians in the U.S. since the coronavirus outbreak began, with about 100 attacks a day. The attacks have started a movement by the group called We Are Uprisers, which is represented by the hashtag #HateIsAVirus. The group is encouraging everyone to post pictures of themselves wearing face masks, using the hashtag to raise awareness of the hate crimes.
This week, a man in Illinois shot his girlfriend, Cheryl Schrieffer, and then himself after fearing that they both might be infected with coronavirus. Patrick Jesernik believed that they had the virus since Cheryl had been having difficulty breathing. Police found Cheryl and Patrick after Patrick's parents requested a welfare check. An autopsy test for coronavirus came back negative for both Cheryl and Patrick.
The daughter of Floyd Mayweather, Iyanna, was arrested for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in Harris County, Texas. 19-year-old Iyanna allegedly stabbed 25-year-old LaPatra Jacobs. LaPatra was hospitalized and needed surgery, but her injuries were not life-threatening. According to authorities, the 2 women had an altercation at DJ NBA Youngboy's home that turned violent. Iyanna pulled out a knife and stabbed LaPatra several times in the bicep. Iyanna faces 20 years in prison if convicted.
Each week, we'll try to introduce you to a podcast that might be new for you. This week's favorite podcast is True Crime Deadline. We had the pleasure of meeting the host of True Crime Deadline, Matt, at HLN's premiere of Forensic Files 2, and let me tell you, we were so starstruck.
I remember him. I remember we first spotted him from across the room and we're like, who's that guy? He must be famous or something.
That's right. He was so handsome and we were so sure he was famous, and that's because he is. Matt is an Emmy-winning crime beat reporter in LA, and in his spare time he covers cold cases, homicides, mysteries, and murders on his super engaging podcast, True Crime Deadline. Be sure to check it out wherever you listen to podcasts.
While we have watched many things this week, our favorite true crime watch was Atlanta's Missing and Murdered on HBO. You may be familiar with the Atlanta Monster case from Netflix's Mindhunter or the Atlanta Monster podcast. This show takes a deeper dive into the stories of the victims, the impact on the community, the conviction of Wayne Williams, plus alternative theories. We want to hear what you all think. Was Wayne Williams the killer, or do you have another theory? Comment below and let us know what you think.
I definitely have some theories on that one.
Yeah, me too.
Well, we have a special guest here this week to tell his hometown murder story. We're here with a very special guest today, my friend Cass, joining us all the way from Austin, Texas, to tell us a murder story with Murdermosas.
Cheers.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Cass. You're such an amazing storyteller already. Like, you have the best stories, period. But you also have all these fantastic murder stories, like, you know, an unusual number of murders.
Yeah.
It's a little scary.
I've just been lucky not to be involved in any of those stories personally, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. I'm glad that you're safe, given like all these, like, you know, questionable figures in your life. Like, I'm glad that you're safe and with us. Well, let's hear it. Let's hear this story.
Okay, so this story, it took place. My only connection to it was that I had worked for the guy who was murdered. So he used to be my boss years ago. He was a nightclub manager, and a few years after we had left is when it happened. So I didn't know the guy who murdered him. But you know, I wasn't particularly surprised to hear that somebody had murdered him. Just kind of the way he treated people that worked there. You know, it was one day you're gonna, you know, piss off the wrong person and they're just gonna snap. But he sort of had that personality that would be more likely to do that. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
yeah. So what happens is, I mean, so my personal story of this. When I worked there, we had to go out and like pass out flyers for the nightclub, and we were not paid for this time, so a lot of people didn't like to do it. And one day, me and my girlfriend were like, "We're not going to do this. We have something else to do." We go into the club later that night, and he fires us for not showing up to an unpaid shift. Like
Wow.
we're not scheduled. It's just so we were pretty upset about that. I can understand anybody. I don't know what this guy was fired for, but he was a bar back who worked at the club, and he's like 20 years old, young kid, um, like ROTC high school kind of kid, I guess kind of nerdy. And the manager's like this jock who just, um, wasn't the kindest person. So he ends up firing the bar back, and the bar back plans out, so about 2 weeks later, he's like, I'm going to kill him. And what he does is he follows him home from the nightclub one night, and he doesn't follow him to his apartment, but just to the building. And he's sitting in his car and he waits for a light to come on. It's about 3 in the morning when bar people get home. So he sees a light comes on and he's like, okay, that's the apartment. He climbs up to the second story balcony, breaks into that apartment, but the person in there isn't the manager. Yeah. So it's this totally unrelated woman who's a bartender as well. So getting home at the same hour. And unfortunately, she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Oh no.
Yeah. And this guy's so dead set on murdering his prior or his former boss that he thinks that if he lets her go, it's gonna spoil his plan. So I don't know what he was thinking. Maybe he watched too many movies, but he ties her up and then he hits her over the head with a gun, like the butt of the gun, and she's knocked unconscious. He's thinking she's dead, and so he's like, okay, see myself out, whatever. I don't know if he stole anything. I don't think he did from her place. But as he's leaving, she becomes conscious again. And so he's like, well, shit, Yeah. Um, Horrible thing, this innocent bystander. Um, he ties a bag around her head and she suffocates that way in her apartment.
God, poor thing.
She lived in the same building as the manager. So 2 more days go by, and he figures out which is the right apartment. He goes back before his boss, former boss, gets off work. He's hiding, based on his confession, he's hiding in the bedroom with his boss's cat. And when his boss comes in the apartment, he's thinking to himself, like I can't back out now. His boss walks in, calls out for his cat, and instead of the cat coming out to greet him, it's this guy with a gun, shoots him. Um, he tries to get away, shoots him again. He falls to the ground. He's like going for the front door, and then he shoots him in the back of the head. And that's it.
Wow. Like, it's so wild because you would think that because there was a murder at this apartment complex, like 2 days before, that the police would be watching the place or.
Well, I don't think that they found out about the murder before. That's why he didn't shoot her, because that would have drawn attention.
Okay.
So yeah.
So like nobody found her or knew she was missing?
So when they did finally find her, obviously they had found the other guy as well. This one detective was like, maybe these are connected. And so they asked this guy who had already confessed, and he was like, yeah, so this is what happened with that. Oh. So after he murders his boss, he steals his car, his wallet, his gym bag. It's a flashy Nissan, so that's kind of hard to hide. He takes it to his ex-girlfriend's house.
Like he thought he was going to get away with stealing the car and killing 2 people.
So how he gets caught was he takes that car to his ex-girlfriend's house, parks it in the garage, and her dad finds it. And these kids are just out of high school, they're 20, pretty young.
Oh.
So the dad calls the cops and is like, hey, this has to be stolen. And they're like, not only is it stolen, it's registered to this guy who was just found murdered. So
dead.
Let's talk about the car, and then they trace it back to, the murderer guy.
Wow.
Yeah, I read a little bit more about, what happened to him after sentencing and whatnot. So he's obviously found guilty. He confesses to both murders. But he goes to jail, and there's one prison guard who just wants to pick on this guy. the murderer. He's like, oh, you think you're a badass because you killed two people, but you killed a woman, so you better hope I'm not working here Saturday. Maybe there's like less surveillance or whatnot. So this prison guard is just after this kid. I mean, after this guy who murdered two people.
I mean, I kind of can't blame him.
Well, it's his rap. The prison guard's rap ends up being less than noble, So
Okay.
he plants drugs in his bed 2 times on 2 separate occasions, and then trades some drugs to another inmate to fight this kid. So by the time they come to sentencing in his murder trial, they've got all this evidence. Oh, you've got drugs. You've hidden drugs twice. You got caught with those. You started a fight. You attacked another inmate. Like this guy is dangerous. Whereas I kind of see the situation as it being more of like a not a crime of passion, but I really feel like this kid felt like he was done wrong when he murdered this guy, and he made a
Right.
horrible decision. But
Really bad decision. And
yeah, innocent people shouldn't die. But
yeah, and I mean, obviously it's completely terrible that he murdered his boss. Like, you don't murder somebody for firing you. But then this poor woman who's just getting off work late, minding her own business,
yeah,
hardworking, like at a bar, and just happens to live in the same building as this guy.
yeah, no, it's yeah. Well, so he obviously found guilty, like we said, and then sentenced to death because there, this is pertinent just because he's not on death row currently. So he's sentenced to death, but his appeal is based on other witnesses while he's in jail. Like, hey, those drugs were planted, and like not only do I know it, my cellmate knows it. I didn't start a fight. The guy that he apparently like started a fight with weighs like 230 pounds, and this kid weighs like 120. So it was like
Right.
he didn't just go up and attack some guy who weighs 100 pounds more than him.
So, do
Uh,
you know like how much the drugs affected his sentencing? Because it just feels like murdering two people would be so much more of a serious offense than drugs.
I think it was just used to the drugs and the fighting were just used to show that like, hey, like this, who does this,
I see.
murders two people and then gets caught with drugs in a fight in prison.
I see. So like they're painting a picture that he's just like a bad guy, which
Exactly.
I mean he
We
is.
we can't argue that he killed two people.
Right.
But apparently, the Texas Supreme Court thinks that that's a valid argument. The guard was fired, or he retired because they found all kinds of drug paraphernalia in his car and heard stories about him trading drugs to inmates.
They were actually his drugs.
I mean, it was just I never like looked back on that story. I looked into it recently a little bit because I didn't know what had happened to him. After death row, had he been murdered or had he been put to death or not?
Right.
And then I found out that he's no longer on death row. He's just writing all these appeals, and we'll see what happens. I mean, but yeah. So that was the story of my boss being murdered.
Wow, that's so wild. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us today, and also coining the phrase murdermosas, which we'll definitely be using from now on.
Yeah, I ran out, so I'm drinking White Claw.
Yeah. I got some of those in the fridge too. I drove all the way to the US before the quarantine for them.
Oh wow! I guess they don't sell them in Canada.
They are not a Canadian thing. And fortunately, they're like everywhere in New York State. So you just have to cross over the border and then it's like White Claw galore.
Nice. Yeah, I'm not proud of it.
All right, Cass. Well, thank you so much. You'll have to come back for one of your other murder stories to tell us soon.
Oh, absolutely. Take
All
care.
right, bye. Do you have a hometown murder or spooky story that you would like to share with fellow monsters? Well, drop a comment below and we'd love to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for tuning into This Week in True Crime with MurderMurder News. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button below, give us a thumbs up, and tell all of your true crime friends.
If you need more of a true crime fix, join our commune at MurderMurder.news for our monster book club and cold case solving groups. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. See you next week.